any stretch of the imagination. Not only can you probably not deter those actors, but it's also very difficult to retaliate against terrorists, which is where the in collaboration with a regional state comes in, because of course then you suddenly have a target. But this is at the very sort of lightweight end of the nuclear war plan. That's sort of the fringe, if you will. The core of this is really Russia and China, and remains so. And in fact, China has increased rather significantly since 1997. Before that, they were not even in the strategic war plan. They were covered by other limited strike options, part of the region. But now, but the Clinton administration put them back in because the Pentagon is very concerned about China's long-term development, where it might be headed. So there were some people who even called the Clinton administration's presidential directive from I think it's November 1997, they called it the China Directive. It was the directive that ordered the Pentagon to stop planning for prolonged nuclear warfare with the Russians. That was way back to the Reagan administration's guidance, that's where that came from. So they cleaned that one up, but they also ordered them to increase planning against the Chinese. So,
can I ask about on Europe and
yes.
on Japan, on extended deterrence in general? There's been a change of policy in the Japanese government, the new Japanese government, in terms of public pronouncement?
I'm not so sure it's been a change in their policy. There's been a change in the way they communicate it, but the Japanese policy has very much been that it wants to be covered by the nuclear umbrella, but it also strongly favors nuclear disarmament ultimately, and certainly reductions in nuclear weapons. It's a question of how they express it, I think, more than a change in the policy. The new Japanese government also supports the continuation of the nuclear umbrella, and that's not the issue. But it's more about how is it going to look.
Yeah.
There has been this bad rumor here in town, propagated by some of the members of the Congressional Posture Commission, that Japan somehow was very hooked on the nuclear Tomahawk cruise missile, that they thought it would be a very bad thing to retire that weapon. We have made a big effort out of speaking to people in Japan about the fact that that weapon is not what matters in the nuclear umbrella. It's a much bigger posture that involves strategic long-range forces. And mind you, I think if I were in Japan, I would think more about how the conventional weapons contribute to deterrence on an ongoing basis. That's much more credible posture, I think. But so now we hear that the Obama administration, there was a report in Kyoto News just the other day, that apparently the Obama administration has told the Japanese government informally that it plans to retire the Tomahawk.
Is it in California?
No, it's both in the Pacific and in the Atlantic. Part of the inventory of the Tomahawk cruise missile are intended for covering scenarios with Japan and South Korea. The other half, so to speak, are designated to NATO scenarios in support of NATO. So over in NATO, there are both weapons on the ground and there are Tomahawks at sea, so to speak. They're not deployed at sea now. They're on land. They have not been deployed since 1992.
They were withdrawn to the U.S., weren't they?
Correct.
Still stored in the U.S.
Yeah. And to just give you an example of how far down the ladder of operational readiness that weapon has actually gone, it used to be deployed on the submarines, on surface ships. In 1992, we pulled all those tactical weapons back from the fleet and onto land. But in 1994, the Clinton administration's nuclear posture, they denuclearized the surface fleet. They took the capability away from surface ships to be able to launch that and other nuclear systems. They only retained it for the attack submarines. And it's only a small portion of attack submarines that actually have this mission. And not only do they not have it sort of on a very convincing manner, but what happens when units, when they go in and they get certified, trained to handle and operate this weapon system, they later get decertified so that the crew doesn't have to waste resources maintaining this capability on the platform. The Navy tried, I think it was in 2003, to have the weapon system retired. The National Security Council intervened and said no, they thought it was a good little stealthy kind of weapon. And so it's still with us today, but it is an old weapon system that is going to expire within the next few years.
And what about Europe? I mean, there's been a change in Europe. There are 5 NATO states.
Correct. Very interesting development.
Yes.
This is a huge dilemma for the Obama administration, apparently. After I put out my my blog the other day about this sentence in the Quadrennial Defense Review, I got a call from the White House saying, we just want to make sure that you understand the right way of seeing this. And at the bottom line essentially was, we're very concerned that things like these signal to the Europeans that here they go again, the Americans. They've just made a decision over the head of the Allies that they're going to retire nuclear weapons from Europe or something like that. That's not quite what we say in the blog, of course, but they are concerned about that process. Right now, NATO is starting up a discussion internally as part of a strategic concept review about how should the role of nuclear weapons function in NATO in the future. That review will finish in November, and as a matter of fact, this weekend there's a part of the NATO War College down in Rome has a session on this particular issue as well. So here comes these 5 countries, 3 of which have nuclear weapons on their territory. Weapons that are supposed to be very important for the US-NATO alliance, saying we don't want them anymore. And so it rocks the boat, and it forces people to think about how do we do this, is it correct? I don't think it's an issue of if the weapons will be withdrawn, it's more a matter of when and what form that process will take.
In those 3 or in all 5?
They're in all 5.
No, but in other words, when you say it's not a question of if but when,